The weight of that envelope felt like a brick in my hand as I walked back to my office. I could smell the dry hay and leather from the open barn doors, the familiar scent of the last chance ranch that had been my life for 40 years. I'd built this place, the feed supply business, the land, every inch of fence, from nothing. And now, this. I pushed the door open, and there he was. Cody, my stepson, leaning against my old oak desk like he owned it, a smirk playing on his lips that didn't reach his cold eyes. He'd been waiting for me. "Afternoon, Clint," he said, his voice too smooth, too practiced. I didn't answer. I just walked straight to the desk, the one where I'd signed loans and payroll and dreams for decades. I slammed the envelope down so hard the old wood groaned. The sound echoed in the quiet room. "What's this?" I asked, though the lawyer's letterhead told me everything. "That," Cody said, pushing off the desk and crossing his arms, "is your future. Sign it. Half the business, the truck, the land. My fair share. Or I take you to court." He leaned in, the smirk widening. "I'll bleed you dry with lawyers, old man. You'll lose the ranch just paying the fees. Save us both the trouble." I looked at him, the boy I'd helped raise, the man who'd driven my 1978 Ford F-150 as his first truck. I thought of Maggie, my wife, his mother, God rest her soul. The grief for her was a constant ache, but this was a clean, sharp cut. All the frustration, the years of his laziness, his sense of entitlement, it boiled up and then settled into something hard and cold in my chest. This wasn't family. This was a predator in my home. My face hardened. I felt the lines in my skin deepen, the way they do when you set your jaw against a coming storm. I picked up the envelope and held it out to him. He didn't move to take it. "No," I said, my voice low and steady, the way I talk to a spooked horse. "You listen to me, Cody. You're fired. Effective right now. Your fair share is the clothes on your back and the direction you're about to walk." His smirk finally faltered. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious," I said. I dropped the envelope at his feet. It landed with a soft, pathetic whisper on the worn rug. "Get off my property. Don't let the gate hit you on the way out." For a long moment he just stared, his arms still crossed, that cold calculation in his eyes. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out, leaving the door open behind him. I watched him go, my hand resting on the solid wood of the desk I'd built myself. The fight, I knew, was far from over, but the first shot had been fired, and it was mine. You know, I still remember the day we drove this old girl off the lot. 1978. Sarah picked the color. Said that deep blue reminded her of the Texas sky just before a summer storm. This 1978 Ford F-150 wasn't just our first new truck. It was the promise of everything to come. I run my hand along the faded blue hood, the camera panning over the truck's classic lines. We built it all right here, the last chance ranch and feed supply. Started with a dream, a handshake loan from the bank, and a whole lot of sweat. This land was nothing but scrub and dust. We'd work from sunup till we couldn't see our own hands, then collapse right there in the bed of this truck, looking up at the stars, planning the next day. I pull a worn, creased photo from my wallet, holding it up to the camera. It shows a younger me and a smiling woman, Sarah, standing in front of a half-built wooden structure. That's Sarah, my heart, right there where the main store is now. She was the dreamer, I was the grunt. She'd say, "Clint, we're going to need a bigger barn," and I'd just start digging the post holes. We poured everything into this place. Our blood, our tears, our joy. It was our legacy. When Sarah got sick, it was the darkest time. But this place, this work, it's what kept me going. It was our shared heartbeat. After she passed, a part of this ranch felt silent. Then Cody came along, Sarah's boy from her first marriage. He was angry at the world, lost. What was I going to do? Turn him away? This was his mother's legacy too. I took him in, gave him a room, 3 square meals, and a job. Tried to show him the value of the work, the satisfaction in a hard day's end. I shake my head slowly, looking out over the feed store. But he never saw it, not really. To him, it was just a chore. He'd lean on a shovel while Maggie and I were moving 50-pound feed bags. He'd clock out early, leaving the books a mess for me to fix. There was always a resentment in him, a bitterness. Like I'd stolen something from him, when all I was trying to do was give him everything his mother helped build. He wanted the keys to the kingdom, but he never wanted to lift a stone to build the walls. This truck, this business, they ain't just things. They're the story of me and Sarah, and some folks, no matter how hard you try, they just don't want to read it. The first crack in the piece I'd built came not with a shout, but with a whisper. I was under the hood of the '78 F-150, my hands black with grease, when old Mr. Henderson from the feed co-op ambled over. He didn't want to buy anything. He just leaned against the fender, cleared his throat, and said, "Heard some talk down at the diner, Clint. You doing all right?" I wiped my hands on a rag, my gut tightening. Truck's running fine. Business is steady. Why? He shifted, uncomfortable. Cody was in there, buying folks coffee. Said you were getting unpredictable, that this partnership was turning sour, that maybe you weren't being square with the books. He held up his hands. I'm just telling you what I heard. You've always been straight with me. The grease on my hands felt suddenly cold. A smear campaign. Cody wasn't coming at the ranch with a sledgehammer. He was poisoning the well, drop by drop. I thanked Mr. Henderson, my voice tighter than I meant it to be. It wasn't just him. Over the next 2 days, 3 other regulars, ranchers who'd been buying from Last Chance Feed for a decade, found quiet moments to ask similar, worried questions. "Cody mentioned you might be selling out," one said. Another just looked at me with pity and said, "Hard times can make good men do strange things, Clint. We're pulling for you." The worst part was the doubt in their eyes. They weren't accusing me. They were concerned. Cody had framed his lies as worry, making himself sound like a man trying to save a friend from himself. It was brilliant, and it made me sick. It was Maggie, my office manager, and the real backbone of this place, who finally laid it out plain. She stormed into the workshop, her face pale under her silver hair. "Clint, in my office. Now." I followed. She shut the door and didn't sit down. "It's gone beyond gossip," she said, her voice low and fierce. "I just got off the phone with Susan at the bank. Cody was in there yesterday, asking for copies of all the old partnership loan paperwork. He wasn't yelling. He was calm, polite, said he was seeking clarity for all parties involved." She looked at me, and for the first time in the 20 years she'd worked for me, I saw real fear in her eyes. "He's getting a lawyer, Clint. He's not just talking anymore. He's building a case. He's trying to make you look unstable, unfit to run this business so he can take it all." I stared out the window at the Ford, parked by the feed barn. That truck and this land were my father's legacy, my life's work. And Cody wasn't just trying to steal it. He was trying to make the whole town believe I was the one letting it slip away. The fight wasn't in a field anymore. It was here, in the trust I'd spent a lifetime earning, and I could feel it crumbling under my feet. The envelope was thick, official, and cold to the touch. I stood in the dusty driveway of the Last Chance, my name, Clint, typed neatly on the front. I already knew it wasn't good news. Good news doesn't come by certified mail. I tore it open right there, the late afternoon sun beating down on the pages. The words blurred at first, then snapped into a cruel, clear focus. Petition, division of assets, de facto business partnership. And then his name, Cody. He was suing me. For a 50% stake in my ranch, my feed supply, my life. A hollow feeling opened up in my chest. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was colder. It was the feeling of a bolt being thrown on a door you didn't even know was locked. My legs carried me on autopilot to the one place that always made sense. I climbed into the cab of the 1978 Ford F-150 and shut the door. The familiar scent of old leather, gasoline, and dry earth wrapped around me. I laid the legal papers on the worn passenger seat and just stared at them. This truck. I found it rusting in a field the same year I bought this parcel of scrubland. We'd been restored together, piece by piece. I'd hauled the first load of lumber for the supply shed in this bed. I'd driven Maggie into town to sign our business loan papers right here on this cracked vinyl seat. Every splinter, every dent in this dashboard was a memory of building something from nothing. And now, Cody's name was on a document claiming half of it all. De facto partner. The phrase was a lie so big it felt like a physical blow. He'd hung around for a few summers as a kid, done some chores when he felt like it. He wasn't here for the back-breaking 16-hour days. He wasn't here when the bank called for the third time. He didn't pour his sweat and his soul into this dust. He just saw something that finally looked like it was worth something, and he wanted to take it. I rested my hands on the steering wheel, the grooves in the steel worn smooth by my own grip. This truck was the first piece of the Last Chance. It was the heart of it. Staring at those legal papers, I didn't just see a lawsuit. I saw a betrayal of every memory this old Ford held. It was a violation of the quiet promise I'd made to myself and to this land, that I would be the one to see it through. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows from the feed supply sign across the hood. The papers sat there, innocent and deadly. This wasn't just a fight over property. It was a fight for the truth of my own story. And as I sat in the silence of my truck, the hollow feeling began to burn, slowly, into something else, something determined. The drive into Bozeman felt different this time. It wasn't a trip for supplies or a rare dinner out. Maggie sat in the passenger seat of my old Ford, her hands folded tightly in her lap. We were quiet, the rumble of the F-150's engine the only sound between us. We were going to see a lawyer, and that alone felt like admitting defeat, like Cody had already driven a wedge into the life I'd built. The office was all dark wood and leather, smelling of old books and strong coffee. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Garrity, with kind eyes but a no-nonsense demeanor, listened as I laid it all out. I felt my voice get tight when I explained who Cody was. "He's my stepson," I said, the word feeling strange and formal. "His mother," She passed a long time ago. I raised him from the time he was 10, but I never formally adopted him. The last chance, the ranch, the feed supply, it's all in my name. It came from my family." Maggie reached over and gave my arm a squeeze. Her being there was the only thing keeping me grounded. Mr. Garrity leaned forward in his chair, his elbows on the polished desk. He steepled his fingers, his gaze sharp and focused entirely on me. "Clint," he said, his voice calm and clear, "in the state of Montana, stepchildren are not automatic heirs. He has no legal standing for a forced share of your estate, not unless you specifically willed it to him, or he was legally adopted." The air just left my lungs. I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath. I looked at Maggie, and I saw the same stunned relief in her eyes. He can't just take it?" I asked, needing to hear it again. "Not a blade of grass," Mr. Garrity confirmed, sitting back. "Without your explicit instruction or that adoption decree, he has no claim. The business, the land, the truck, it's all yours to do with as you see fit." A weight I'd been carrying for weeks, maybe even years, just cracked and began to fall away. It wasn't about the money or the land, it was the principle. The last chance was my father's sweat, my mother's hope, and my own life's work. To think Cody thought he could threaten his way into it, it had poisoned every good memory I had of him. Driving home, the same mountains looked different. The F-150 didn't just feel like my truck. It felt like my future again. Maggie was smiling, a real easy smile I hadn't seen in too long. "So, what now?" she asked. I kept my eyes on the road leading back to the ranch. "Now," I said, my voice firmer than it had been in months, "we go home, and we start making a plan to keep it." For the first time, I felt like we actually could. The bell over the door of the Last Chance Ranch and feed supply jingled, but not with its usual friendly sound. It felt like a warning. I was behind the counter, helping old Mr. Jenkins figure out a mineral supplement for his prize bull, when I saw him. Cody. He didn't browse the aisles. He walked straight toward me, his expensive boots clicking on the worn concrete floor with a purpose that silenced the casual chatter in the store. "Clint," he said, his voice too loud, too smooth. "We need to talk. Now." Mr. Jenkins glanced between us, his friendly face clouding with concern. A couple of ranchers by the seed bin stopped talking. Everyone knew the tension, the family dispute over the land, but we'd all been keeping it polite. Until now. "I'm with a customer, Cody," I said, keeping my voice even. "You can wait your turn." He ignored that, planting his hands on my counter, leaning in so only I could fully see the cold calculation in his eyes. "I'm done waiting. This is your last chance. You settle with me now, on my terms, or I'll bury you. I'll tie up that deed in court until you're bled dry on legal fees. You won't be able to afford a bag of feed, let alone this place." The air left the room. Mr. Jenkins took a small step back. My heart hammered against my ribs, a hot, furious drumbeat. I could see it all. The years of my dad building this business, the early mornings I spent here as a kid, the smell of hay and leather and oil from the old Ford F-150 we used for deliveries. This wasn't just a store. It was my father's handshake, my family's name. I looked at Cody, really looked at him. It wasn't my cousin standing there. The familial pretense was gone, stripped away by his threat. This wasn't about fairness or a misunderstood will. This was a predator who'd seen a weakness, a legacy he thought he could carve up and sell off. He wasn't defending a right. He was attacking a legacy for pure profit. The calm that settled over me wasn't peace. It was the quiet eye of a hurricane, a crystal-clear fury. This was the final straw. The last insult. He'd brought his fight to my home floor in front of the community my dad had served. I slowly set down the feed catalog I'd been holding. "Mr. Jenkins," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "let me get Maggie to help you finish up. She's in the back." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "You hear that, Cody? That's the bell on the door of my store. Those are my customers. This is my land, my business, and my father's legacy." I met his gaze, letting him see the resolve that had just hardened into something unbreakable. "You don't get a last chance. You already had it. Now get off my property." The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. He'd expected me to flinch, to bargain. He hadn't expected the calm, final refusal. Without another word, he turned and left, the bell jingling ominously again behind him. The confrontation was over, but the war had just truly begun. I knew it, and for the first time, I was ready for it. The air in the office of the Last Chance Ranch and Feed Supply was thick with the smell of old wood and dust. I stood by the big oak desk, my hand resting on the cool, dented metal of my 1978 Ford F-150's keys. Today, that truck wasn't just my ride. It was a symbol of everything I'd built, everything I was about to protect. Maggie had done her part perfectly. She'd called Cody, her voice all sweet reason, suggesting a final private meeting to settle things like adults and avoid more legal fees. I knew he couldn't resist. His greed was a predictable engine, and Maggie had just poured high-octane fuel right into the tank. On the desk lay 2 pieces of paper. The first was a formal termination notice, severing any and all of Cody's tenuous, self-proclaimed ties to the ranch's operations. The second was thicker, more consequential. It was the new will, drafted by the lawyer in the city. Its language was ironclad, its purpose crystal. Upon my passing, Cody Robert Gaines was to receive the sum of $1 and no more, with the ranch, the business, and all assets going into a trust. It was a legal wall, and I was about to show him the blueprint. I heard the crunch of gravel outside. Right on time. Maggie gave me a tight, nervous nod from her chair in the corner, her knitting needle still for once. The door swung open, and there he was. Cody swaggered in, that familiar, arrogant smirk plastered on his face. He looked around the office like he was already measuring it for new curtains. "Clint, Maggie, let's make this quick. I've got places to be," he said, dropping into the chair opposite me without being asked. "We'll be quick," I said, my voice steady. I slid the termination notice across the desk. "This first. You're done here. No more showing up, no more consulting, no more anything. Sign it, and we move to part 2. He scoffed, scanning the page. "This is worthless. You can't just—" "I can, and I have. Legal counsel confirms it. Sign it, or our conversation ends now, and you leave with nothing but the bill from your last lawyer." His eyes narrowed, calculating. The greed won, as I knew it would. He scrawled his signature with a furious flourish. "There. Happy? Now, the settlement." "This is the settlement," I said, and I placed the will on top of the signed termination. I watched his eyes dart over the first lines. I saw the smirk vanish, replaced by a wave of pale, stunned rage as he read the clause naming him. The color drained from his face. You can't do this," he whispered, the arrogance finally cracking. "It's already done, Cody. The lawyer filed it this morning. This is just a courtesy copy. You came here for a payout. You just got it. $1. That's the sum total of your interest in my life's work." I leaned forward, the legs of my chair scraping on the old floor. The trap wasn't in the meeting. The trap was your own belief that you'd always get what you want. You walked right into it. He stared at the documents, then at me, his jaw working soundlessly. He had nothing. No leverage, no claim, no future here. With a final venomous look, he shoved the chair back and stormed out, the screen door slamming shut behind him. The silence he left behind was peaceful. Maggie let out a long breath. I looked at the 2 documents on the desk, then out the window at my old Ford, sitting solid and reliable in the afternoon sun. The trap had sprung. The ranch was safe. The air in the conference room at the lawyer's office felt thick enough to cut with a knife. I stood by the window, looking out at Main Street, my back to the door. I could hear Maggie's steady breathing beside me. She was my rock. The door clicked open. I didn't need to turn around to know it was Cody. I could feel the smugness radiating off him, a cold, familiar wave. I finally turned as he strutted in, that arrogant smirk plastered on his face, his fancy lawyer in a suit that cost more than my truck trailing behind him. "Clint," Cody said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Maggie, look, I think we all know why we're here. Let's just settle this like adults for the sake of the business." He went to take a seat at the head of the table like he already owned the place. That's when I moved. "You're right, Cody," I said, my voice calm, steady. It was a tone I'd practiced in the mirror for a week. "We should settle this." I didn't sit down. I stayed on my feet, looking down at him. I reached into the folder Maggie handed me and pulled out the first document. I slid it across the polished table. It made a sharp, final sound. "That's your termination notice, effective immediately. You're fired from Last Chance Ranch and Feed Supply for cause, disloyalty, gross misconduct, theft of business opportunities." I listed them off, each word a hammer blow. "The evidence is all attached. Emails, bank records, witness statements from suppliers you tried to poach." His smirk flickered. He glanced at the paper but didn't touch it. "You can't do that. I'm family." "Which brings me to this," I said. I pulled out the second, heavier document. This one I placed carefully in front of his lawyer. "The last will and testament of my father, John Buck Hawthorne, revised and notarized 3 months before his passing. You are hereby removed as a beneficiary. Entirely. You inherit nothing. Not a dollar, not a square inch of land, not a single share in the business." Now the smirk was gone, completely erased, replaced by a pale, stunned blankness. He looked to his lawyer, a silent plea in his eyes. His lawyer, a professional, scanned the document. He adjusted his glasses, his lips pressed into a thin line. He looked from the will to me to Cody. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod to his client. "It's in order, Cody. The provisions are clear. Stepchildren have no automatic inheritance rights under state law, and Mr. Hawthorne has explicitly disinherited you here." The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I'd ever heard. It was the sound of a lock clicking shut. The sound of my father's legacy and my future being secured. Cody just stared at the table, his grand plan crumbling to dust right in front of him, with nowhere left to hide. The silence in the office after Cody left was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. I just stood there, my hand still resting on the old oak desk that had been my dad's, staring at the empty doorway. He'd stormed out, his face a thundercloud of humiliation after I'd laid out the county's own zoning maps right next to his forged ones. He had no legal leg to stand on, and he knew it. His whole bluff had been called right in front of half the town council. I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for months. It was over. The fallout was swift, and it wasn't me who had to lift a finger. A town like ours runs on trust, and Cody had set his on fire for everyone to see. Within a week, Maggie was my chief source of information, her texts lighting up my phone with updates. The diner where Cody used to hold court over coffee? They stopped saving his usual booth. The hardware store owner, a man who'd known my father, was heard saying he wouldn't sell Cody a nail to hang his own hat. He was being shunned, plain and simple. His scheme to strong-arm me out of the Last Chance ranch and feed supply wasn't just ruined, it had backfired spectacularly, painting him as the greedy outsider he was. Then, one crisp morning about 2 weeks later, Maggie didn't text. She came right over, pulling up in her Jeep beside the 1978 Ford F-150 parked in its usual spot by the feed store. I was wiping dust off the truck's fender, a peaceful, mindless chore. "He's gone," she said, leaning against her door. No hello needed. I stopped, the rag in my hand. "Gone?" "Packed a U-Haul last night. Headed east from what I hear, for good." She gave me a small, satisfied smile. Bozeman's finally rid of him. I looked past her, down the long driveway lined with pine trees, toward the main road. I tried to summon some feeling of victory, of triumph, but it didn't come. Instead, I just felt a deep, settling calm. The threat that had been looming over my dad's business, over this land, was just gone. His reputation was the wreckage he left behind. I nodded, tossing the rag into a bucket. "Good." Maggie came over and patted the Ford's hood. "This old girl gets to stay right where she belongs." "Yeah," I said, my voice a little rough. "She does." I watched Maggie drive off, then I just stood there in the quiet sunshine, listening to the wind in the pines. The ranch, the feed store, the old truck. It was all still here. It was mine again, not because I'd won some dramatic fight, but because I'd held my ground. And the town, my town, had remembered what loyalty looks like. The air itself felt lighter, like after a long, tense storm has finally passed. The sun was dipping behind the hills, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple, the kind of quiet show you only get out here. I was on the porch, in my old rocking chair, just looking. The sign for Last Chance Ranch and feed supply was just visible from here, and knowing it was quiet for the night, that everyone had gotten home safe to their families, settled something deep in my chest. I heard the screen door creak open and shut. Maggie stepped out, holding 2 mugs. She handed one to me, the steam carrying the rich smell of good coffee into the cool evening air. "Thought you might need a warm-up," she said, her voice soft. "Thanks, Mags." I took the mug, my fingers brushing against hers. We didn't need to say much. We'd said it all in the fight, in the long days of putting things back together after Cody was gone. The court saw to him, and the town, well, they remembered what he tried to do. That was enough. My eyes drifted from the barns to the driveway. There she was, the 1978 Ford F-150. I'd washed her this afternoon, the deep blue paint shining even in the fading light. She wasn't just a truck. She was the first big purchase we made for the ranch, me and my late wife. Countless feed bags hauled, fence posts delivered, and tired, happy drives home at the end of a long day. Seeing her parked there, clean and cared for, felt like keeping a promise. "Paperwork's all filed with the lawyer," Maggie said, following my gaze. "The employees are secure, and the animal shelter knows about the provision in the will. They were real grateful, Clint." I just nodded, taking a slow sip of coffee. That was the final piece. Knowing that this place, this legacy we built from dirt and dreams, would outlast me. It would keep providing for the folks who worked here and for the helpless creatures at the county shelter. My wife would have liked that. She always had a soft spot for the broken things. A deep, easy breath filled my lungs. The villain was gone. The business was secure. The land stretched out before me, peaceful and enduring. The legacy wasn't just in the land or the buildings. It was in the quiet hum of a running engine, in the smell of feed and honest work, in the warmth of a coffee mug shared on a porch at dusk. It was preserved,